Today's question was, where should I go when I start to read the Bible? This person expressed frustration over not really knowing where to go, what to read, and the Bible is a confusing book, and it is a question I have got many times in my career. So, where should you start if you want to read the Bible? Many Christians are told, hey, you need to read the Bible. You need to read the Bible. It's God's source of wisdom. It's God's source of enlightenment to you. And then they're just handed this book, which is really 66 books, which has all sorts of different literary styles and writing patterns. And some are historical, some are apocalyptic, some are letters, some are the Gospels, some are poetic. And it's all just in the Bible. And they're handed the Bible and they're like told, go. That's not always so helpful. So this is what I always recommend to folks wanting to engage the Bible, maybe for the first time, maybe for the 100th time, but looking for a little bit of guidance. Head to the New Testament and head to the Gospels. The Gospels are 4 books that start the New Testament: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. You'll find Matthew, Mark, and Luke read fairly similar, though there are differences. And then John reads pretty different, but it is still all about Jesus. Why do I recommend you start there? Because it's all about Jesus. The famous red words of the Bible that the editors put in later to signify the words of Jesus Christ, who is the founder and perfecter of our faith, who is the linchpin of our faith, whose death, burial, and resurrection seals our salvation. So why do we go to the Gospels to begin? Because we want to learn about Jesus. Now, there's a lot in the Bible that is interesting, that is fascinating, and that can even be spiritually helpful. But if I'm telling you to read something just to get you going, I want you to encounter the words of Jesus. I want you to see how he treats people. I want you to see how he speaks, how he talks about heaven, how he talks about hell, how he talks about generosity, how he talks about the Father in heaven, how he talks about the mission of this earth, how he talks about love, how he talks about his neighbor, the parables he tells. And I want you to take those words in. Because you remember those famous bracelets, the WWJD? So many people would wear those without actually knowing what Jesus would do. Well, how do you know what Jesus would do? You read the words of Jesus. You read the stories about him, and those come primarily from the 4 Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Now, the next logical question will be, okay, Pastor Craig, where do I go after that? I want you to go back to Matthew. Read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John again. I would highly recommend you read through the Gospels 5 to 10 times before you head anywhere else in the Bible. You will never outgrow the words of Jesus Christ and their meaning and impact in your life. They are the foundation of our faith. And so get those Gospels into your heart and into your body. Know the stories of Jesus well. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Then, if I was going to say where you should maybe head next, I would just head the book right after John, Acts. Acts is the story of the early church. How did we get founded? And so reading the book of Acts is going to be really helpful for you to understand how the church came to be. Where did the disciples go from Jesus' resurrection? And then what did they do after? But having just read the Gospels, there's going to be a lot of helpful things in there that you go, oh, okay, so here's Peter, here's John. Oh, they're picking a new, apostle because of what Judas did. And you're going to understand what's going on. And then in the book of Acts, you get introduced to a man named Paul, which is going to help you understand a lot of the rest of the New Testament because he is one of the most prolific writers in the New Testament. So I don't want to go then just kind of ranking the next books, but I would start with Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, then read the book of Acts. And then if you're looking to get into the Old Testament, I would say just go right to the beginning. Go to the book of Genesis, see the creation of all things where God speaks and it is created. And then you can see the creation of his people. And there's a lot of interesting stuff in there. That's a much longer book, 50-ish chapters. But there's a lot you can glean from in the book of Genesis as well. But where to begin? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Then where? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But then what? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. When you have internalized those, when you know the words of Christ very, very well, you know who he is and what he's done, you'll be amazed at how that shapes you, how that changes you. Then head into the book of Acts and see how the early church was formed, and then maybe start venturing out into some of Paul's letters, start building that theology piece, head in the Old Testament, start reading some of Genesis, understanding the history of God's people, and you can kind of go from there. But just in the beginning, you can't go wrong with the words of Jesus.